When a devoted kindergarten teacher glimpsed bruises beneath the sleeve of a silent little girl's ever-present blue coat, his quiet world shattered. As he dug deeper into the child's strange behavior, her hostile foster guardian, and a web of institutional neglect, he found himself hunted, silenced, and alone in a system built to look away. With the child's life hanging in the balance, he had to confront his own buried trauma to stop a cycle of abuse that could claim her next. This was a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Mr. Carver stood on the edge of the schoolyard, the cool morning air biting at his cheek. He was watching the children filter into Willow Creek Elementary, their bright faces full of possibility. That day felt like any other day to him at first. He saw old friends hugging, new classmates shuffling nervously, and excited chatter about everything from upcoming art projects to lost and found mittens. Yet, beneath the surface of this routine scene, he sensed something stirring, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite name. It was as though some hidden tension had crept onto the campus before dawn, weaving itself among the classrooms and hallways, waiting to reveal itself when the time was right. He wrapped his coat tighter around his tall, thin frame and breathed in the early April scent of dewy grass. Spring was arriving in faint pastel hues. The pink blossoms on the trees, the soft yellow sunlight that danced across the asphalt, and the gentle green buds pushing up through flower beds. This season always brought him a quiet sense of renewal, but it also carried a pang of nostalgia, for this was the time of year he had lost his younger sister all those years ago. He could still vividly recall how that tragedy propelled him into teaching. He had been too late to save his sister, but he swore he would never be too late for another child in need. He was nearly ready to head inside when a small figure caught his eye. Standing at the curb, wearing an oversized blue coat, was a timid little girl he had never seen before. She was hesitating at the gate, gazing at the playground as though it were a frightening maze she wasn't sure how to enter. Her hood was pulled halfway up, casting part of her face into shadow, and her hands gripped the coat's cuffs so tightly he wondered if she might disappear into it altogether. The uneasy feeling that had been drifting around the schoolyard settled at last, right there, in that moment. He could sense that this little girl carried her own storm cloud of anxieties. He approached with a reassuring smile, conscious that he mustn't startle her. "Good morning," he said softly, the morning stillness making his voice sound louder to his own ears than he intended. "You must be Elsie. I'm Mr. Carver. I teach kindergarten here." The girl did not immediately look up. She seemed to shrink further into her coat, and for a brief second, he felt the awkwardness of a stranger imposing on her guarded world. Then, with a slow nod, she acknowledged him. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "Mommy says it never comes off." There was something in those words that sent a chill through him. The remark made little sense at first, but the resolute tone in her tiny voice indicated she believed it wholeheartedly. He knelt beside her, ignoring the dull ache in his knees. "Your coat?" he asked gently. "It's all right if you're cold, Elsie. Would you like to come inside? We have a warm classroom just through those doors." He indicated the hallway that led to the kindergarten wing. One of the other teachers passing by gave him a quick nod and a wave, but he kept his focus on Elsie. He sensed that if he turned away for even a moment, she might vanish. Her presence was that tenuous, that fragile, as if a strong gust of wind could scatter her like dandelion seeds. She nodded again, still not meeting his eyes. Slowly, he guided her along, offering his hand, which she didn't take. That small refusal, full of caution and fear, made his stomach twist with sympathy. He couldn't explain it, but in her wary glance, he glimpsed a reflection of a deeper pain he had carried for years. He recognized the guarded look of a child who had learned, far too young, that the world could be cruel. Once inside, the sounds of the school washed over them, children laughing as they opened their lockers, the squeak of rubber soles across waxed floors, the hushed voices of teachers preparing morning lessons. Mr. Carver led Elsie to his classroom, passing the colorful drawings pinned to walls, the name tags carefully taped on cubbies, and the big bright letters on the bulletin boards that spelled out words like imagination and kindness. The classroom was a space he had taken pride in creating, full of warm light, shelves of picture books, bins of crayons, and an art corner adorned with a rainbow of construction paper. Many children thought of it as a refuge, where they could learn, play, and feel protected. He showed Elsie her cubby with her name written in neat letters across a pastel label. The rest of the children filed in, some of them bouncy with energy and ready to greet him with, "Hi, Mr. Carver." He returned every smile, but his mind was half on Elsie, who stayed apart, shoulders hunched, one hand locked in a vice grip around the zipper of her coat. A few children shot her curious looks, but because it was the first day she was there, they seemed more intrigued than anything else. Mr. Carver introduced her to the class, and there was a soft "Hello, Elsie," from the group. She offered only a timid wave. She didn't take off the coat, even though the room was comfortable and some of the other children were removing their lighter jackets. It looked like a winter coat, heavier than necessary for early April. As class began, Mr. Carver tried to coax her into the day's activities. She remained silent for most of the morning, except for an occasional nod or shake of the head. She gripped her sleeves with an intensity that made him think she feared an invisible threat, something intangible that might strike if she let her guard down. By lunchtime, some children had taken their seats at the small round tables. Elsie lingered by the door, hesitant to join. Mr. Carver gently invited her to sit. "We have applesauce, fruit cups, and little sandwiches today," he said, smiling at her as he handed her a tray. "You can have as much or as little as you like." Elsie's eyes flicked to the tray, then to Mr. Carver, and she gingerly took it, walking to the corner of the table farthest from the other kids. She set the tray down, but she didn't touch the food. He busied himself at his desk, sorting through some papers, though his attention remained firmly on her. Over the years, he had seen plenty of shy kids, some who were anxious, some who had faced hardships, but there was something singularly heartbreaking about Elsie's solitude. It was not just shyness, it was a fear so deep it bordered on dread. An instinct he had honed after years of teaching, and years of personal scars, was whispering that something was amiss. That coat, the bruises he vaguely thought he might have glimpsed in the morning's dim light, her trembling voice, her reluctance to join the other children, all of it signaled a bigger story behind her small frame. That afternoon, during free art time, the children scattered around the tables, using crayons and markers, cutting shapes out of colored paper, or sculpting little figures from dough. Elsie quietly sat with a blank sheet, her crayons untouched. Mr. Carver walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on the table. "Would you like to draw something?" he asked in his soft teacher voice. He saw the conflict in her eyes. She clutched her crayons and stared at the paper. As if driven by an unseen surge of resolve, she finally pressed the tip of a blue crayon to the page, drawing wobbly lines. He watched her, noting how she seemed to lose herself in the movements of color. After a few minutes, she relaxed a fraction, forgetting her fear as she sketched something that appeared to be a flower. Seeing that small sign of progress, Mr. Carver felt a flash of hope, but the feeling was short-lived. Another child, Sarah, bumped into Elsie's elbow by accident while searching for scissors. It was a harmless little collision, barely enough to jostle most children. But Elsie's reaction was startling. She flinched violently, knocking her own cup of crayons onto the floor. The red and yellow crayons scattered, rolling across the tile. She began to tremble, her eyes terrified. That was when Mr. Carver saw them. Faint, blotchy marks near her wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. They were pale in some places, dark in others, as if in various stages of healing. He recognized the shape, fingers. They looked like the impressions left by an adult's firm grip. His heart pounded, recalling the promise he'd made long ago, never to ignore a sign of a child in danger. He was about to say something, anything to soothe her, when the lunch bell rang in the hallway. The children jumped up, as children do, ready to line up. Elsie quickly grabbed her crayons, frantically pulling her sleeve down. She zipped the coat over her wrist in such a hurried gesture that he knew it was not a bruise from the playground. There was a primal shame in her movements, and that shame could only come from having learned she must hide her injuries. That was the first day. It was all the evidence Mr. Carver needed to realize that Elsie's situation was not a simple case of being shy or adjusting to a new school. Still, he also understood that he needed more proof before making serious allegations. He wasn't sure if he was dealing with physical abuse in her foster home, or if there was some other explanation for those bruises. Regardless, he intended to keep a close eye on her. In the ensuing days, he recorded every detail in a small, spiral-bound notebook he kept in his desk. He wrote down every time Elsie declined to remove her coat, every time she flinched at physical contact, and every time she exhibited signs of distress that went beyond normal nerve. He paid special attention to the bruises. He counted them, noting their shapes, positions, and hues. Sometimes they were faint, sometimes raw and fresh. Each note weighed on him, tangling him in memories of his younger sister, whose desperate eyes he could still see in his mind whenever he closed his own. He also tried to connect with Elsie. He asked her gently, "Do you like books, Elsie? Would you like to read something together?" He offered her picture books about animals or families with comforting storylines. She usually nodded but remained remote. One afternoon, as the rest of the children were painting, Mr. Carver drew her aside and offered her a small stuffed bear from the classroom's cozy corner. "He's lonely," he told her, trying to coax a smile. "Do you think you could keep him company today?" She didn't speak, but she held the bear close, and for a moment, he thought he saw her lips tilt up in the slightest curve of a smile. Still, the tension never dissipated. She refused any direct question about her home. When the bell rang at the end of the day, she bolted from the classroom before Mr. Carver could say goodbye. He noticed that she didn't ride the school bus with the other children. There was always a tall woman, Margaret Sloane, waiting at the front, arms folded, eyes scanning for the first sign of Elsie. The moment Elsie arrived, the woman would take hold of the girl's shoulder, not in a gentle, motherly way, but in a controlling grip that left Mr. Carver's blood cold. He tried to approach the woman once, but she glared at him and said, "We're late," before marching Elsie away. Just from her tone, he could tell she had no interest in communicating. Mr. Carver tried to remind himself that not all stern adults were abusive. Some people simply carried a tough demeanor. But his instincts, finely tuned by past tragedy, kept sounding alarm bells. He began looking into Elsie's records, but they were sparse. She was transferred mid-semester with minimal documentation, just a note that indicated a change of foster placement. No mention of her previous guardian, no mention of the reason for the transfer. The more he looked into it, the more blank pages he found. It was as though her paperwork had been compiled in haste or withheld entirely. His concerns were validated further when he discovered an unusual ally in the midst of the staff, Detective Harlow. She was a reserved woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, usually wearing unassuming clothes. Officially, she was introduced as a community liaison, volunteering time at the school, assisting with safety workshops and counseling for the children. Unofficially, as Mr. Carver learned in a private conversation, Detective Harlow was assigned to investigate child welfare issues in the area, discreetly. She had her own history with the foster system, and she had petitioned her department to let her focus on infiltration work. That meant nobody was supposed to know she was an active detective unless absolutely necessary. She explained it plainly. Some forms of abuse slip under the radar. We need to see the day-to-day reality, not just tidy case files that say everything is fine. Mr. Carver confided his worries about Elsie, and to his relief, Detective Harlow didn't brush him off. She leaned in, her eyes sharp, as he told her about the bruises and the child's withdrawn behavior. "I've seen too many cases like this," she murmured. "Keep doing what you're doing, document everything. I'll see what I can look up about Margaret Sloane. If something is off, I'll find it." He felt a glimmer of hope. Having an ally, someone who believed him, lightened the burden. Yet, as the days went on, Elsie's condition didn't improve. In fact, more bruises appeared. It wasn't just bruises on her arms now. Mr. Carver noticed a faint mark on her collarbone one morning when her coat's zipper was slightly undone. Another time, she winced when trying to sit down, as though her ribs were hurting her. Each discovery hammered at Mr. Carver's conscience. He wondered how many times social services had looked the other way, or how many times children's silent pleas had gone unheard. He was determined that Elsie would not become another casualty of a broken system like his sister had. He also found himself haunted by flashbacks in the quiet moments after school. One memory, in particular, replayed in the dim lighting of his living room when he finally sat down to grade papers or plan lessons, the moment he failed to protect his sister. He had been barely a teenager himself, powerless against a system that placed her into a neglectful foster home. She had tried to tell him something was wrong, but he was too young and too scared to fight for her. When he learned the horrifying truth, that she had been hurt and ultimately passed away due to complications from her injuries, he had vowed he would never again be silent. For years, nightmares plagued him, and he threw himself into the profession of teaching, hoping to save a child like his sister had once been. Those memories fueled him now. He started pressing the administration for more details about Elsie's background, making phone calls to Child Protective Services, asking if there was any open case. The response was frustratingly vague. A social worker, Ms. Harding, gave him a cursory assurance. "We're aware of the situation," she said. "We appreciate your concern, but you need to let us handle it." The abruptness of her tone, and the sense that she just wanted him off the phone, made Mr. Carver suspect that not everyone was eager to help. Detective Harlow, in contrast, kept him informed of her findings, though they were slow in coming. "So far, Margaret Sloane has a clean record," she said one afternoon, her voice low so no one passing by in the hallway could overhear. "But I've run across references that she had contact with multiple foster children in the past. Every child was moved to a different home within months. There's a pattern, but the official documents don't say why. Transfers happen all the time for various reasons, so it could be that she has a short fuse, or it could be something else. The system is rife with holes. Paperwork can be lost, or people can be paid off." He swallowed hard. "Paid off?" She nodded grimly. "Yes. Sometimes foster parents have connections within the local agencies. Maybe they're forging medical record. Maybe they're forging mental health evaluations on the child. The reasons can be complicated. Some do it for the money, some do it to keep a child from speaking out, and some do it for more sinister reasons. I'm not jumping to conclusions, but I've seen it before." Her words unsettled Mr. Carver, but also steeled his resolve. He had never been naive, but hearing her say it so plainly reminded him just how pervasive and deep the corruption could go. The next few days seemed to stretch into weeks. Each morning, Mr. Carver braced himself for Elsie's arrival, hoping to see her in a better mood, or maybe minus a bruise, but each time, she looked more guarded than before. The tension between them became palpable. She seemed to sense he was prying into her secrets, and while part of her might have been relieved, another part was terrified. Occasionally, he would see a flicker of longing in her eyes, like she wanted to share something but couldn't. The burden of that secret was too great for a 5-year-old to carry. Then came the day Elsie didn't show up to school. Mr. Carver felt an immediate jolt of alarm. He asked the front office if there had been a call from her guardian. "Yes," the secretary said, scanning her records. "Margaret Sloane called, said Elsie was unwell. She'll be out for the rest of the week." Mr. Carver's heart sank. The timing was suspicious. He couldn't stop picturing those bruises, some of them fresh, and the possibility that Elsie had been pushed to a tipping point. That night, he barely slept. Even in dreams, he saw his sister's face overlapping with Elsie's. The memory of that final day in the hospital. He had stood by his sister's bed, feeling helpless and angry at the system that had let her be hurt, merged with the image of Elsie's wide, fearful eyes. He called Detective Harlow the next morning. "Is there anything you can do to check on her?" he pleaded. "A welfare check, maybe? Margaret said she's sick, but I'm worried." Detective Harlow paused for a long moment. He could almost hear her chewing over the possibilities. "I'll see if I can get some officers to do a discreet home visit," she said. "But you know how it goes. We can't force entry. If Margaret insists Elsie is merely ill, and we see no immediate danger, that's as far as it goes." "That might not be enough," Mr. Carver said, frustration cracking his usually calm voice. "I know," she replied. "But let's see what happens." The next day, Mr. Carver waited anxiously for an update. By afternoon, Detective Harlow returned his call. "They did a welfare check this morning," she said. "Margaret wouldn't let them see Elsie. She claimed Elsie was sleeping. She gave them a doctor's note saying Elsie had a fever. Without any probable cause beyond your suspicions, they couldn't press the issue." Her voice held a hint of anger. "They backed off." Mr. Carver felt sick. The system was built in such a way that if the guardian was smooth enough, it was all too easy to hide a child behind closed doors. In the days that followed, he alternated between despair and determination. Maybe he was crossing boundaries, but that night he drove by Margaret Sloane's listed address, a modest single-story house in an older neighborhood. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of movement inside. He didn't even know what he intended to do if he saw anything. He just needed to be there, somehow, to watch over Elsie, even if from a distance. He stayed parked outside for nearly an hour, feeling foolish and borderline desperate. Elsie returned to school the following Monday. Her coat was zipped to her chin, and she had fresh bruises under her right eye, barely concealed by the hood. She walked with a slight limp. As soon as Mr. Carver saw her, sorrow and anger churned in his stomach. "Are you all right, Elsie?" he asked gently, trying not to sound accusatory or alarmed. She looked at him for a moment, as though she might say something important. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry," and brushed past him to her seat. Her words echoed in his mind. Sorry for what? Sorry for existing? Sorry for not being able to speak out? He didn't know, but it broke his heart. By that point, he was certain that if the system wouldn't save her, he would have to. That morning, he approached Margaret Sloane when she came to drop Elsie off. He tried to be cordial. "I'd like to talk with you a bit about Elsie, if you have a moment," he said, smiling politely, though the forced pleasantry felt strange in his mouth. She eyed him with suspicion. She had a gaunt face, narrow eyes, and her hair was pulled into a tight bun that gave her a severe look. Her lips were drawn into a near-permanent scowl, making her appear perpetually annoyed or angry. "Why?" she asked flatly. Mr. Carver swallowed. "Just a teacher's interest in her well-being," he said. "She's been quite withdrawn, and I've noticed some bruises." She stiffened. "Are you implying something?" The hostility in her voice practically crackled in the air. A few other parents, casting glances in their direction, quickly looked away. "I'm concerned," Mr. Carver said, keeping his voice low and measured. "That's all." "Then don't be," she snapped. "You teach your class, and I'll handle Elsie's welfare, thank you very much." She spun on her heel, marching out of the school. Mr. Carver could do nothing but stare after her, feeling a red-hot sense of helplessness. He glanced at Elsie, who had witnessed the exchange from a few feet away. She seemed to shrink into her coat, her small body trembling with tension. That same afternoon, he found Detective Harlow waiting for him at the entrance to his classroom. She gestured for him to step outside so they could speak privately. Her face was grim. "I've got something," she said. "I've been digging deeper into Margaret's background. It turns out she's not working alone. She's connected to a small group of people with ties to Child Protective Services. No official charges have been brought, but there have been rumors for years about bribes, fraud, and hush money. The rumor is that Margaret is the front line for a pipeline of kids that get shuttled around. The specifics are murky, but it explains why the system looks the other way. She might have helped covering up the abuse. Mr. Carver felt his jaw tighten. So if they're all in on it, how do we protect Elsie? How do we expose them? Detective Harlow rubbed her temples. We need evidence. Solid evidence. Something that can't be ignored. You and I both suspect Elsie is being abused, but suspicion isn't enough. If we can prove there's a larger network of corruption, the entire ring goes down. We just need one break. He nodded, though his stomach churned. That single break might come too late for Elsie. What do we do in the meantime? He asked. She gave him a hard look. We document everything. Medical records, photographic evidence of the bruises, witness accounts. You keep your own notes, and I'll try to gather intelligence on Margaret's dealings. If we can get someone from inside to talk, or if we can catch them in the act, that might be enough to blow this wide open. Mr. Carver felt a swell of determination. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, the memory of his sister pressing against his heart. I won't let Elsie slip through the cracks. In the days that followed, he followed that plan to the letter. He quietly snapped discreet photographs of Elsie's bruises with his phone, taking care to do it when no one else was around. He continued updating his notebook, describing day by day how Elsie behaved, what she said, how she reacted to even the slightest physical touch. He tried to console her, to get her to open up, but she remained mostly silent. Yet, there were fleeting moments where he sensed she was on the brink of confiding in him, perhaps only a word away from telling him some crucial secret. He caught glimpses of her staring at him from across the room, her eyes pleading. But every time he approached, she'd close up again, as though frightened by an invisible threat. Margaret, in the meantime, grew openly hostile. She started showing up earlier than needed, scowling at Mr. Carver if he got too close to Elsie at dismissal. One afternoon, she confronted him in the parking lot. If you keep prying into my affairs, I'll file a harassment complaint against you, she hissed, her voice laced with venom. He stared her down, trying not to let his anxiety show. All I'm doing is caring for Elsie, he said calmly. She leaned in. Stay out of it. Then she turned away, her footsteps echoing across the asphalt. Despite his outward composure, Mr. Carver felt a quake of fear inside. Margaret was obviously connected to people with power. She wouldn't have made that threat lightly. He confided in Detective Harlow again the next day. She's threatening legal action, he said quietly, as they stood in the empty cafeteria, away from listening ears. Harlow nodded, frowning. That lines up with what I've heard. She's got money and influence behind her. I'm not sure who exactly is footing the bill, but it's big. She's not afraid to use lawyers and intimidation to silence critics. Mr. Carver exhaled. I won't back down, he said, more to himself than to Harlow. She offered him a sympathetic look. I know. Just be careful. I don't want you to lose your job or be driven out of here. You're Elsie's best hope right now. He thought about what losing his job would mean, how it would effectively remove any line of communication or watchfulness he had over Elsie. The administration might side with Margaret if enough pressure was applied from the outside. The possibility terrified him, but he knew it was real. At that point, Harlow revealed some of her own past. I grew up in the foster system too, she said, her tone quiet but resolute. I went through 3 different homes before I landed with an older couple who cared for me until I turned 18. But before that, I had experiences similar to what Elsie is facing now. I had to fight for my voice every step of the way. That's why I'm doing this work, and that's why I'm telling you, don't let them scare you off. The children need someone like you. Her words emboldened him. Together, they decided to escalate their strategy. Mr. Carver would try to speak with Elsie gently, encouraging her to admit what was happening. If they could get it on record, from her own words, that might be enough. If she mentioned the name of someone who had threatened her, or if she gave any clue that Margaret was part of a bigger scheme, that would be the breakthrough they needed. Harlow, in turn, would keep following paper trails and talking to possible informants within Child Protective Services. They had no illusions it would be easy, but it was the only path forward. Over the next week, Mr. Carver tried to find the right moment to speak privately with Elsie. Most days, she was guarded, flinching away if he approached her desk when no one else was around. Finally, one afternoon during recess, when all the other children were playing outside, and Elsie lingered in the classroom claiming she felt tired, he seized the opportunity. He sat down on the rug near the reading corner, not too close, offering her ample space, and said quietly, "Elsie, I'm worried about you. I want to help you, but I can only do that if you tell me what's happening." She stood by the art table, her coat zipped, her small hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't speak. He continued softly, "I know sometimes adults can hurt children. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us don't do their job. If you ever need to talk, I'll listen. Nobody is allowed to hurt you, Elsie." He let his voice waver, showing genuine emotion. He hoped it would encourage her to trust him. She still said nothing, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Eventually, she managed to speak a single sentence. "They said bad things happen if I talk," she whispered. His heart clenched. "Who said that?" he asked, trying to remain gentle but unable to keep the urgency out of his voice. She shook her head fiercely, as though terrified even to speak the name. "Don't want to get you in trouble," she mumbled. Then she clammed up again, turning away. He didn't push further that day, afraid of frightening her into deeper silence. He reported it to Harlow, though. "She's definitely threatened by them," he said. "Whoever they are, it's not just Margaret. There's more to it." Harlow agreed. "I'll keep pressing. We're close to something big. Once we have enough evidence, we can make a move, but we have to do it carefully. If we spring too soon, they'll bury it all, and Elsie will vanish from the system." The word vanish sent chills down Mr. Carver's spine. He knew how easily a child could be relocated without a trace. He spent the weekend pacing his apartment, feeling like he was teetering on the edge of a precipice. The entire day on Sunday, he tried to distract himself by tidying up or working on lesson plans, but his mind returned, again and again, to Elsie's frightened whisper. In the half-lit space of his living room, he saw flashbacks of his sister's face, the heartbreak of losing her to a system that pretended everything was fine. By Monday, the tension inside him had only grown. As he arrived at school, he braced himself for whatever new crisis might unfold. Elsie came to class looking particularly pale. She had circles under her eyes as though she hadn't slept, and she was dragging her right leg a little. Something had happened over the weekend, but she offered no explanation. During circle time, they were doing a simple alphabet activity, naming words that started with certain letters. Elsie sat with her hands folded in her lap, coat zipped, silent. A classmate accidentally bumped her shoulder, and she winced in pain, letting out a tiny whimper. Alarm flared in Mr. Carver. Carefully, he asked, "Elsie, do you need to go to the nurse's office?" She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. With a trembling voice, she said, "Mommy said don't talk to grown-ups about anything." The rest of the children fell silent. Mr. Carver felt a surge of protective anger, but he kept his composure. He gently said, "Elsie, if you're hurt, it's okay to tell a grown-up you trust. That's how we keep you safe." She covered her face with her hands, refusing to speak further. He ended circle time early and asked the other children to go to their next activity. Then he coaxed Elsie over to a quiet corner with a plush rug and pillows, where the class often had reading time. He tried to check if her shoulder was hurting, but she recoiled. "Please don't," she said, voice trembling. He backed off, giving her space, but it was clear she was in pain. Fear and concern warred inside him. He knew that at some point, he might have to call Child Protective Services again, but this time with more urgent language, demanding immediate intervention. However, he also knew they might bring Elsie back to the same foster guardian if they decided the bruises were inconclusive. That had happened to too many children before. The conflict in his mind mirrored the tumult in his heart. He was torn between following protocol, reporting his suspicions again, and the fear that protocol would fail Elsie. In the end, he decided that the best chance for genuine change was to help Detective Harlow gather enough evidence to dismantle the ring once and for all. That decision set off a chain reaction. Harlow, spurred by Mr. Carver's updates, reached out to a trusted colleague in the department. She explained the severity of Elsie's situation, the repeated bruises, the suspicious mid-semester transfer, the hostility of Margaret Sloane. This colleague, Sergeant Blake, told her, "I'll do some unofficial digging. But be careful, we don't know who in Child Protective Services might be compromised." While Harlow worked that angle, Mr. Carver ramped up his own documentation. He discreetly copied Elsie's attendance records, any notes from the nurse about her condition, though those notes were sparse because Elsie rarely went to the nurse. He made sure to keep all this information backed up somewhere safe, worried that if Margaret or her associates caught wind of his actions, they might try to confiscate or destroy it. Just as they were inching closer to a strategy, everything took a turn for the worse. Elsie didn't come to school again. This time, there was no phone call to the office. Days went by and there was no word. Mr. Carver's unease turned into cold dread. He called Detective Harlow immediately. "She's gone," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean gone?" Harlow asked, already sounding alarmed. "She hasn't been at school for 3 days, and no one's called in an absence. I talked to the office. Nobody can reach Margaret either." Harlow muttered a curse under her breath. "All right. We'll send someone out to the address again. Don't panic. It could be anything." But they both knew it was likely far more sinister than anything. That evening, Mr. Carver paced in front of the deserted house again. The windows were dark, the blinds shut. No sign of life. The next-door neighbor, an older woman, peered at him over her fence. Summoning courage, he approached her politely. "Excuse me," he said, trying to mask his urgency. "Did you happen to see the people who lived here leave?" The woman eyed him skeptically for a moment. Then she nodded. "They left in the middle of the night about 2 days ago. Packed up a few things real quick. I thought it was strange. Didn't look like a normal move out." His heart sank. Was there a little girl with them? The neighbor hesitated, glancing around as though nervous. Finally she said, "Yes, I saw her. She was wearing that big coat. She looked afraid." The woman's expression softened. "I'm sorry if something bad happened." He thanked her, feeling numb. The worst-case scenario was unfolding before his eyes. Margaret had vanished, taking Elsie with her, and the system would not be quick to track them down. That same night, Detective Harlow called Mr. Carver with more devastating news. "We have footage from a gas station out on the highway. A woman matching Margaret's description was spotted with a little girl wearing a blue coat. Paid in cash, left right after. We lost them after that." Mr. Carver felt despair rising in him. So she could be anywhere. Harlow's tone was grim. "Yes. I'm pushing for more resources on this. We'll get an Amber Alert if we can verify that Elsie is indeed in danger, but you know how complicated the system is when the child is with a legal guardian. Margaret Sloane might claim she's simply relocating, which she has a right to do unless we can prove abuse." He pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling a headache bloom. "We have to do something." Harlow's voice steadied. "We're working every angle. We'll find them." The next several days were a frenzy of phone calls, documents, and frantic efforts to raise alarms. Mr. Carver questioned whether he should go public, contact a local journalist, anything to draw attention. But Harlow advised him to wait, explaining that if he went public too soon, Margaret and her network might go deeper underground. "We're close to unraveling them," she said. "They'll be watching the news. Any leak might tip them off." That cloak-and-dagger approach left Mr. Carver feeling helpless. He attended staff meetings like a ghost, barely present. His students noticed his distraction, and he tried to keep a calm, reassuring front, but it was difficult when Elsie's empty seat taunted him every time he walked into the classroom. The small cubby bearing her name was like a silent accusation, reminding him he had failed to keep her safe. At night, he found himself unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and drifting through memories of his sister's face. He kept remembering how his sister tried to reach out, how the bruises on her arms never fully faded before new ones appeared. He thought about how nobody had listened in time, how the system's bureaucracy had swallowed up any attempt to rescue her. In the end, she paid the ultimate price. He couldn't let that happen to Elsie. A week passed with no updates. Then, out of the blue, Detective Harlow called him, excitement brimming in her usually cool voice. "We got a tip," she said. "One of Margaret's former acquaintances came forward. She's willing to say there's a place out in the remote woods that Margaret has used before, a rundown property, some kind of inherited cabin or shack. It's off the grid. Word is that's where Margaret might go if she needs to hide." Mr. Carver swallowed hard. "Is she going to let you search it?" Harlow said, "We're working on it. The tip gave us enough to request a search warrant, but it has to go through channels. It might take time." "Elsie doesn't have time," he said, voice breaking. "She could be hurt right now." Harlow paused, then sighed. "Mr. Carver, I know you're desperate. Don't do anything rash. Wait for my call. We need to do this properly, so the evidence we find is usable in court. If we barge in without a warrant, the entire case could be compromised, and we might lose Elsie forever." He didn't like it, but he agreed to wait. The next day was a torment of patience. Then, late in the evening, his phone buzzed. Harlow spoke quickly. "We got the warrant. We're heading out there tonight with a small team, people we trust. No one else. If you want to come, you can, but stay back. This could be dangerous." Mr. Carver felt his pulse race. He agreed immediately, though the mention of danger sent a chill through him. He thought about the possibility that Margaret might not be there alone, that there could be others in her ring, but he refused to shy away. If Elsie was there, he wanted to be there too. They drove out together in unmarked cars, traveling under the cover of darkness. The route led them far from city lights, through winding roads flanked by dense trees. Eventually, they reached a rutted dirt path that branched off into the woods, barely visible in the headlights. The mood in the car was tense, each occupant quietly running through possibilities. At last, they saw a faint glow in the distance, a porch light, or perhaps a lantern. They parked a short distance away, stepping out into the crisp night air. The hush of the forest wrapped around them. Mr. Carver could hear the pounding of his own heart, and he imagined Elsie's small figure, alone in some drafty shack. Harlow and her fellow officers led the approach, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Mr. Carver hung back, trying not to let his fear overwhelm him. The shack came into view. It was a small, dilapidated structure with warped wooden boards and a sagging roof. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows. As the officers stepped onto the porch, they announced themselves. "Police! We have a warrant!" The moment was taut with tension. Silence followed, then hurried footsteps inside. A door slammed. "Check around back," Harlow hissed to one of the officers. Another circled the perimeter. Mr. Carver hovered near the trees, hands trembling in anxious anticipation. He heard muffled movement from within, then the sound of a window shattering. Moments later, someone burst from the back, a figure running into the woods. The officer who had circled around gave chase. The shouting that followed was too distant for Mr. Carver to understand, but he recognized the voice as belonging to Margaret. Rage and desperation fueled her frantic attempts to escape. Meanwhile, Harlow and another officer forced their way into the shack. Mr. Carver, unable to stand still any longer, rushed toward the door. He saw a dim interior lit by a single overhead bulb. The place was filthy, with peeling wallpaper, dirt-streaked floors, and a stench of mildew. Searching through the rooms, he finally found Elsie huddled in a corner, still wearing that oversized blue coat. She was curled into a ball, trembling. A wave of relief and horror swept over Mr. Carver. Her face was bruised, and there were darker marks on her arms and probably more on the rest of her body. Her cheeks were stained with tears, her eyes swollen from crying. He approached slowly, calling her name in a gentle voice. "Elsie. Elsie, it's me, Mr. Carver. You're safe now." She didn't move at first, as if paralyzed by fear. Then she recognized him, and threw herself into his arms with a strangled sob. He held her, feeling her tiny body shaking, realizing in that moment just how close they had come to losing her forever. Harlow appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily. "Margaret ran for it," she said, "but we have other officers out there. They'll catch her." Then she glanced at Elsie, and her expression hardened with protective fury. "We're taking you to a hospital," she said gently to the child, kneeling beside her. "We need to get you checked out." Elsie clung to Mr. Carver, and he whispered soothing words to her, telling her it was all going to be okay. He wanted more than anything for that promise to be true. Outside, he heard voices shouting. The echo of hurried footsteps came closer, followed by an officer's voice yelling, "Stop!" Then silence and a rustle of leaves. After a few moments, they saw two officers escorting Margaret in handcuffs. She was raging, spitting bile at anyone within earshot. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wild. "You idiots don't know what you're doing," she screeched. "I was protecting her." Harlow looked at Margaret in disgust. Protecting her from whom? Margaret's eyes darted to Elsie, then back to Mr. Carver. "You think you know everything, but you're just a pawn. I was trying to keep her out of reach of people far worse than me. I'm just the scapegoat." Mr. Carver felt a surge of anger. "You hurt her," he said, voice shaking. "All those bruises. That's not protection. That's abuse." Margaret glared at him, then began spewing some nonsense about secret deals, threats from shadowy figures who wanted Elsie for themselves. But the officers whisked her away, fed up with her theatrics. In the aftermath, Elsie was rushed to the nearest hospital. Mr. Carver rode in the back of the ambulance with her, while Detective Harlow followed in another vehicle. The paramedics treated her bruises and scrapes, and though she was in pain, her injuries were deemed treatable. The more severe wounds would be the ones that couldn't be seen, psychological scars etched into her young mind. Sitting by her hospital bed, Mr. Carver watched over Elsie as she finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. He found himself remembering his sister's last hours in a hospital bed. But this time, he was not helpless. He had intervened, and as morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, he felt a fragile thread of hope. Over the next days, an enormous series of legal and bureaucratic processes began. Margaret was charged not only with physical abuse and kidnapping, but also with potential involvement in a broader network of corruption. Detective Harlow and her team uncovered evidence linking Margaret to shady deals within Child Protective Services, forging documents, and receiving money to take in children who were then funneled through the system for questionable reasons. Some officials were implicated, forced to resign, or arrested as the investigation spread. The system, at least for a time, was forced to reckon with its own failings. News broke of the scandal, and public outcry erupted. Mr. Carver found himself both lauded and criticized. Some accused him of overstepping boundaries, while others hailed him as a hero. Through it all, his only concern was Elsie's well-being. As soon as she was stable enough, the hospital discharged her into temporary protective custody. But Mr. Carver knew how easily that could shift, especially if other unscrupulous foster homes were out there. So he began the steps to apply for custody himself. The memory of losing his sister haunted him, but he also felt a deep conviction that he could give Elsie the safe environment she deserved. He was single, yes, and his finances were modest, but he had a stable job and a record of unwavering dedication to children's welfare. He spent countless hours in family court, going through interviews and evaluations. Detective Harlow testified on his behalf, as did doctors who treated Elsie, verifying the abuse she had suffered under Margaret's care. Weeks turned into months, a grueling legal process overshadowed by Elsie's slow recovery. Through therapy sessions, she slowly began to open up, revealing the extent of the abuse she had endured. She admitted how Margaret had told her horrifying stories about the people in the system who would do worse if she ever spoke out. In some twisted way, Margaret believed she was saving Elsie from an even darker fate, but she had become a monster in the process. When the day of the final custody hearing arrived, Mr. Carver was a bundle of nerves. Detective Harlow was there for emotional support, along with some colleagues who had grown invested in Elsie's well-being. The judge listened to testimonies, sifted through documents, and weighed what was best for a child who had known nothing but betrayal from the adults in her life. In the end, the judge announced that Elsie would be placed under Mr. Carver's foster care, with a pathway to adoption if everything went well. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Elsie stared up at him, her eyes reflecting an uncertain hope. She was still wearing a coat, not the same heavy blue one, but a lighter jacket more appropriate for the warmer weather. She seemed unable to believe that she might finally have a safe home. "Can I really stay with you forever?" she asked in a small, tremulous voice. He knelt down, tears pricking his eyes, and said, "Yes, forever. We'll work it out. You and me." She flung her arms around him in a hug, and he held her tightly, feeling a profound sense of relief and responsibility. In the months that followed, Elsie began to heal. Living in Mr. Carver's modest apartment, she discovered small joys she had never known. Bedtime stories with hot cocoa, weekend trips to the park, even simple rituals like having her own space with pictures on the walls. She started attending therapy sessions regularly. The nightmares that once plagued her became less frequent. She still had anxieties. She would tense up when strangers touched her shoulder or if she heard arguments. But gradually, her smiles came more easily, and she made friends in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the fallout of the corruption scandal continued to unfold. A handful of Child Protective Services employees resigned under investigation, and some faced criminal charges. Reforms were proposed. Tighter oversight, better background checks, more accountability. For once, it seemed the system was changing, though slowly and imperfectly. There were public calls to institute new measures so children like Elsie wouldn't fall through the cracks again. Mr. Carver, however, measured success by Elsie's progress. He saw her transform day by day, blossoming from the silent, fearful girl in that oversized coat into a curious, spirited child who loved to draw colorful pictures of animals, especially bears. He learned that she had once dreamed of owning a stuffed bear but was never allowed any toys in Margaret's home. Now, she had a whole row of them perched on her bed. On Elsie's 7th birthday, she and Mr. Carver organized a small celebration in their living room. Detective Harlow came, bringing a homemade card. Some of Mr. Carver's fellow teachers were there too, celebrating how far Elsie had come. There were balloons, a chocolate cake, and a small stack of presents. Elsie beamed the entire day. At one point, she whispered to Mr. Carver, "This is the best day ever." He had to blink back tears. The legal adoption process went through when Elsie was 8. In a small, heartwarming ceremony at the courthouse, Mr. Carver officially became her father. Though the old wound of his sister's loss would never vanish, he felt a measure of redemption in protecting Elsie from that same fate. As the judge's gavel tapped lightly, finalizing the adoption, Mr. Carver stood beside Elsie, and she held his hand with a confidence she'd never had before. Years passed, and Elsie thrived. She grew into a resilient young woman, carrying with her the compassion she had gleaned from Mr. Carver's kindness and Detective Harlow's tireless pursuit of justice. She excelled in her studies, and by high school graduation, she had already decided on her path. She wanted to become a teacher, just like the man who had saved her. She told him one evening, as they prepared dinner together in the small, cozy kitchen, "I want to help kids the way you helped me." He smiled, tears shining in his eyes. "You'll be wonderful at it, Elsie. You already are." True to her word, Elsie went to college, focusing on early childhood education. Though she was older now, that spark of gentle empathy still shone in her eyes, reminding Mr. Carver of the timid little girl he first met on the schoolyard with bruises she was too scared to reveal. She found ways to partner with organizations championing foster care reform, speaking out about her experiences in the system, giving a voice to those children who still suffered in silence. Her story, combined with the ripples of the corruption case that followed Margaret Sloane's downfall, inspired further legal changes, prompting new teacher training on spotting abuse and mandatory check-ins for vulnerable children in foster care. The press occasionally revisited the story, labeling Elsie a symbol of resilience. She never sought the spotlight, but whenever asked, she credited Mr. Carver's unwavering compassion and Detective Harlow's courageous investigation for saving her life. She told interviewers, "They fought for me when no one else would." By the time Elsie finished her teaching degree, Mr. Carver was nearing the twilight of his own career at Willow Creek Elementary. On the day of her graduation, he sat in the audience, watching her cross the stage in her gown, hearing the applause that erupted for the young woman who had survived such darkness. He thought of his sister then, and he felt a bittersweet mix of sorrow and gratitude. He couldn't change the past, but at least Elsie's future was bright. Later, when Elsie began her first job as a kindergarten teacher, they shared a quiet celebration in Mr. Carver's living room, just the two of them, reminiscing about her time in his own kindergarten class, where she first showed up in that oversized blue coat. Elsie joked gently about how she used to zip it all the way to her chin. Then she became serious and said, "Dad, you never gave up on me." "Thank you." He smiled, tears in his voice as he said, "I made a promise, Elsie, a long time ago. And I'll keep it every day." That promise, carried from the loss of his sister to the rescue of Elsie, had at last come full circle. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.